All right, welcome to 9 Steps to a Great Drum Mix. This is sort of a basic overview and definitely follows what I'm talking about in the Drum Mix Toolkit chapter, chapter 1, I think it is, 9 Steps to a Great Drum Mix. So I'm just going to go through some basic things here. Let me find the arrange window. I just have a simple drum beat here from an old drummer of mine. And it's nothing crazy, but it does have enough tracks. It has a snare, up and down snare, a hi-hat, toms. They're actually edited out, so there's instead of gating them, I just edited out all of the silences, so they're really only being played on like a few different places here. Then I have an overhead right and an overhead left. Then I have a room drum. So this is basically how that sounds, more or less unmixed. All right, so that's just a simple beat, easy to work with here. So step 1 here is starting the initial balance. And I usually just kind of do this first. So if you had all faders up like that, I would want to start maybe here so that they're not hitting. They might be hitting like -10, -11 or something like that. And then I play that. Yeah, so they're hitting a little bit less than that, but that's fine. Then you sort of have to decide what you want to get out of this. Is this a kick and snare heavy song, or do you want a lot of room and a lot of overhead? In this case, I actually want a lot of kick and snare, so I'm gonna try to accent that a little bit. And then just panning wise in general, kick and snare are in the center. The under snare is in the center too. I always pan the hi-hat slightly to the right, just because that's how I feel like it should sound. It should sound slightly to the right as I'm looking at the drummer, but we can all have a longer conversation about where the hi-hat should go later. Then I pan things around and pan the toms around, just sort of around the stereo spectrum. And then the overheads are hard panned left and right. This should actually be right and left. And then the room mic is in the middle. So going into this, as if I wanted to accent the kick and snare a lot, I would probably drag the overheads down a little bit, and I'd take a little bit out of the room sound first. So let me just do a quick pass here. Okay, let's leave that for now. I do really like the overhead and the room sounds, but it is, like you have to think about what kind of track it is, and it might not really be a good idea to have it be super big and super roomy because it's sort of a tight rock sound that we were looking for. Although the room sound might get accented more than the overheads, just to get that added depth. But you might have noticed that, I'm trying to push the snare up and it isn't really getting anywhere. And that brings us sort of to the step number 2, which is checking polarity and phase. And this is a great example because if we go into here and we look at a snare waveform, you can see that they are out of phase with each other, more or less. So like when the upper mic, when the upper waveform is going up, the under snare mic waveform is going down. And you can do this in multiple ways. You can, I can invert the entire signal, but the easiest way to do that is to just put on a polarity plugin, or an EQ that has a polarity button, or sometimes it's a plugin that just does this one thing. Whatever you choose to use, as long as it flips the polarity, we're good. So just take a listen to the changes in the snare drum as I hit this polarity switch. Let's redo that because I have to actually turn the EQ on. So let's wait for suspense again. I thought about editing this out, but maybe we'll just leave it in to show you how stupid every engineer can be when they forget to flip the plugin on. All right, you ready? Just all that sort of thickness and low mids and low end is back into the drum, because now you have both the under and the over snare microphones and tracks working together instead of against each other. So that's step number 2. Now we are on to step number 3, which is grouping. So you want to simplify your mix if you have a lot of microphones on the drum kit itself. We don't have a lot here, but we have, a fair amount. So I like grouping the drums together so it makes it easier to mix later on in the mix. So what I usually do is there's multiple ways to do this. You can do all drums, or you can do kick separately, snare separately, and then all other drums. As you can see, I have buses ready to go here, and these buses are actually not routed. They're just routed all to the mix bus here, instead of being, you can also route the kick to the kick bus and then route the kick to the drum bus, and then have everything eventually feed into the drum bus. That's easy if you just want to be able to pull the fader up and down to just sort of control the entire mix. But if you start adding effects such as reverb and stuff like that, it's going to add a bunch of reverb to the low end of the kick drum, and you could filter that out with reverb, but it's nice to be able to work with the kick drum separately. At least that's how I feel. So multiple ways of doing this, and refer to the book there's 3 or 4 ways I show you. And then so the kick goes to bus 1, then I can group once I've flipped the polarity and now they're working together. I can put them together in one drum group, and then I actually just put this all here to the drums. If you wanted to have, toms separately, that's cool. But this seems to work most of the time. So at this point, we have everything here. So we don't really need to go back to the individual tracks again until maybe later down the line if you need to do some rebalancing, or you need to do some specific EQing on the toms or anything like that, for instance. So let me just show you here. Now we have 3 faders instead of all of these. So there you could hear the drum sound with just the kick and the snare, and then you could also hear the drum sound with just the overheads and the hi-hat and the toms. Well, but the toms aren't really being played because they're edited out. So at this point, we're in step 4, which is the bus processing. So I like doing bus processing because I can put one plugin that's going to affect a lot of different tracks instead of putting a CPU-intensive plugin on all of these tracks. For instance, my UAD Vision channel strip, I can only use maybe 3 to 4 instances of this before I'm out of memory on my Universal Audio Apollo. So it's good to be able to group everything together and then like have everything run through this. So that's basically the bus processing. So you have a balanced drum kit through the faders on the tracks, and then you've bussed them all together, and now you can start tweaking the buses here and refer to the chapters on what you can do to sort of process your drums. I want to keep these videos as short as possible, but do go out and experiment with your own on your own mixes, or just this multi-track if you want, because it is included. And then step number 5 is sample replacement if needed. So if you don't like what the kick sounds like or what the snare sounds like, you can do sample replacement at this point. And you can also do transient designers at this point too if you wanted to, and refer to the videos on those for more information on that. So I would just, let's quickly replace the kick here. Let's find rock something. Where are we here? Bass drums. There we go. And then we go rock bass drums, and let's just go through these real quick, and I'll find something just for fun. That sounds sort of late 80s Metallica right there. Well, that's a kind of a big, cool sounding kick drum, but I think it might be too big in the mix. I think I would rather have a snappier, tighter kick drum than something that has too much room sound. So that could be a pretty good one. It does lack a little bit of low end. This is actually a kick sample I used in Dirty Magic's first single, and so I labeled it so I could refer back to it when I needed to do the drums again, and I wanted to have a cohesive sound throughout their EP that we're recording, or will be either about to recording, or have recorded, depending on when you bought this tutorial. So yeah, that's the sample replacement. We don't need to really go into that in detail. And at that point, step 6 is just individual processing. So once you've done all the things that you need to do, and in the bus processing stage, and you might need a little extra, maybe it's a little extra snap from the beater. When in this case, you have the kick bussed individually. So it doesn't really matter. You can just bus process that. There's really no bus. Well, there's no grouping involved. It is a bus, but it's not really a group, whereas the drums are a group as well as a bus. So if you had all of your tracks bussed to the drum bus in in its entirety, so all of the tracks going to the drum bus. You might not want to EQ a snap of the beater of the kick drum using an EQ on the drum bus, because it will also affect, say, that basically means you're trying to boost in the high mids from like 1K to 4K or something like that. And if you're boosting at 3K, for instance, you're also going to be boosting the snare drum, and you're also going to be boosting some of the harshness of the cymbals. So at that point, it's better to do individual processing and EQ or compress separately on the track itself, the individual track itself. And then step 7 is just rebalancing, because once you start adding all of these things to your mix, there is inevitably going to be some gain changing going on. So you might actually end up with a drum bus that is slightly louder. So you want to move that fader down or rebalance the initial drum mix so that you get back to where you initially were, but with a tighter and a better sounding drum sound in general. So one of the final steps, or basically the final step before you sort of add it into the mix, which I won't be doing right here in this video, but is adding reverb, and then you can also add parallel processing, such as parallel compression or whatnot, to the drums as well. And it's good to leave that until later, because you're usually making I tend to mix everything together in mono and dry, and then start adding space and effects. So if we were to assume that this is just the mix that we have, let's just assume that. I'm just going to show you a little bit about the reverb and the parallel compression here. So I have a drum reverb going on here. I really like these gated reverbs because they just they don't have this big tail, so they keep the drums spacious while still leaving not cluttering up the rest of the mix and adding a bunch of extra stuff, extra space and decay and room sound and that sort of stuff. So just pick the medium gate here. I can't remember, medium or big gate or whatever. Let's just start with the medium gate, and let's add that to the drum reverb, or to the bus here. So you can hear how this is actually, adds a little bit of extra depth to the hits, but it doesn't clutter up the release of the signal or the decay of the signal. So, and that's actually this depth here. So I can actually make this even bigger sounding if I drag some of these things up. So let's do that. You want to be careful about the pre-delay, because otherwise it'll really make it skew the signal weirdly. And then let's say you liked this particular drum sound, or we can maybe make a little hall here. Is there like a plate or like a nice room, music club, large wood room, music club? Let's see how that sounds. So you can hear the decay of the reverb there much more. So that's nice. You don't have to use gated reverbs all the time, but the Valhalla room has a lot of pretty good presets here. And then if you wanted to separate the snare and add an extra layer of space to this to the drum sound, you can have a different style of snare sound, or a different space in the snare sound. Let's use even if it's just to add an extra thickness. You don't need to make it bigger. You just want to add an extra kind of extra feeling of depth, if you will. So let's find a small space here, maybe a plate. Is there like a let's see here. Drum plate. Let's see how that works. Let's put this a little bit down. So a little bit too much reverb going on right there. Well, that doesn't sound good at all. So let's go over to maybe a short snare haul. It's always good to experiment with your reverbs and try to make sure you know all the different types that you have at your disposal there. So I like blending it in with the rest of the mix so that you can really find the right spot. And then if you can't find the right spot at all, it's usually a sign of the wrong reverb. Yeah, that's too short too. Let's try a 0.7 second drum plate. Try that again. And I'm EQing these out, so just kind of taking out the lows and taking out the highs. It just makes everything blend together better. That's definitely the best so far. And as you can see here, I'm putting the entire send here. I put it on to unity gain. So there's a lot of send signal coming into these, which is why these faders are down so low, because there's a lot coming in. So you don't need much to add that reverb into it. But of course, if you do it differently, there's another way of doing it, which is basically just you have your returns always on unity, and then you add the send to the reverb as you want. It's just basically it's doing the same thing in two different ways. It just reacts to the reverb slightly differently depending on the amount of input coming into the reverb. So that's it. Then we just do parallel drums, and just for simplicity's sake, I'm just doing I think it's all buttons in here. It's like shift and 20. Then this particular compressor just does all buttons in. And then I have a fast attack and a slow release. And let's take this gigantic reverb out of here. And then I'm going to add the parallel drums here. It's already set. So I'm just going to add the entirety of it. Just put it to unity gain here. And then I'm going to slowly push this up just so you can hear how it sounds. And then I have an EQ here. I like to boost. This is a bit drastic, isn't it? Let's delete that. Oh yeah, it was the filter. Let's put the filter on 32. I like to boost the lows and the highs a little bit because, well, you can read about it in the book. It's just that with a boost in the lows and boost in the highs, and then I always like to cut the sort of boxiness out a little bit more. And with a fast attack and a slow release, the lows and the highs, there aren't really any transients, so it just adds this cream in the high and the low end. So let's see if that is actually true, because it is fairly unmixed, but I'll show you how that sounds. So you can see I'm just pinning the needle here. It wasn't actually compressing at all. So I'm just pinning the needle here between -10 and -20 just for some drastic effect. And then I'm going to put it into the mix here. And I doubt I'll need a lot. So you can hear that incredibly compressed signal underneath. If that isn't enough for you, and you feel like the kick and the snare also needs it, you can always add more. Or you can, even if you wanted to add less on the overheads, but then add a lot to the kick. That's obviously a little overboard, but you know, without any processing or anything like that, it still shows you a good example of what you can do. So that's sort of it for the 9 steps to a great drum mix. Read on in the book so that you can get a better feel for what you do at every step of the process. But I hope that this video was a good primer on showing you the sort of step-by-step process that you can take to not be too worried about what you're doing when you're mixing your drums. So see you in the next video.